As a small business owner, have you ever felt overwhelmed by the pressure of choosing the right hire or leading a team? Or have you ever found yourself tolerating a bad hire because you fear trying and failing again as you repeat the hiring process? If so, you're not alone, and you are in the right place. Welcome to the Growing Your Team podcast. The Growing Your Team podcast teaches business owners like you to expand your unique business by teaching you to master the hiring and team management process. Hiring and managing a team does not have to be a challenge. You just have to learn to do it right. And the Growing Your Team podcast teaches you how to become a confident leader who hires right every single time. Now, let's jump into the show where each episode you will learn tips on how to identify what type of help you need on your team, how to source amazing candidates, how to conduct interviews that lead you to your ideal team member, how to onboard successfully, and how to lead every person in your business so you have a team of rock stars who you are happy to pay every single paycheck. So let's jump in and teach you how to hire like a pro. Hello, Jamie Van Kuyk here, and welcome back to the Growing Your Team podcast. Today, I have on guest Michelle Bomberger. Michelle believes that every business deserves to have the same strategic law advantages as mega corporations. She is the CEO and managing attorney at Equinox Business Law Group. Her experience as a business owner and entrepreneur gives Michelle unique insights into the emotional and practical aspects of owning a business and how important legal infrastructure is to growth and success. One of the things that Michelle wanted me to call out was the legal disclaimer. The contents of this podcast are solely informational and not legal advice. Seek legal counsel from an attorney familiar with the specifics of your situation before taking or refraining from action. In this episode, Michelle and I are talking about the power of having legal counsel consistently for your business. We talk a lot on this podcast about fractional support, meaning being able to hire highly knowledgeable experts without having to pay the cost of having someone full time. And what Michelle is sharing today is a little bit about how you can get that high level legal knowledge in a fractional type relationship. We're also talking about why this is important. Most people handle legal needs for their business in a reactive basis, meaning something happened, you're afraid you might be in trouble, and you're trying to see what you can do to protect yourself or avoid being in trouble or minimize the impact if you really are in trouble because you did something you shouldn't have. So instead of being reactive, we're going to talk about how having legal counsel can help you be proactive, because you have someone that is paying attention to the laws and changing laws so you can focus on your business. We talk about how this can impact your growth, and most importantly, how it can impact you growing and leading your team effectively. So let's jump into the conversation. Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Growing Your Team podcast.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited for today's conversation. This is such an important part of business that I think often gets overlooked. So before we jump into everything, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Sure. So I am the founder and CEO of Equinox Business Law Group, and we are a boutique law firm in the Pacific Northwest that provides a general counsel for businesses. So the way that a large company has a general counsel who's a part of the management team who helps not only do the day-to-day firefighting that lawyers are typically thought about doing, but also the strategic planning and helping businesses be proactive in all areas. But employment and HR is a big part of what we do. So we've been doing that about 20 years now.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's like one of those things, especially as small businesses, we are very reactive when it comes to getting legal help. It's like, oh, something happens, let me figure this out versus let me be proactive. And I think it's a lot of times is when we're starting our businesses, we don't have a lot of extra funds and we're like, oh, I'll worry about that when I need to worry about it, and not realizing that sometimes not worrying about it up front creates more problems that then we have to worry about later.
100%. And I think that the legal industry has set itself up to really force people to be reactive because there's so much uncertainty in engaging. You don't know how much it's going to cost. You don't know really what to ask necessarily in many cases, and you don't know that what you're going to get is really valuable. And so the instinct is to use other tools, the internet, friends, employees to figure things out. But then there's always this sort of lurking element in the back of your mind as to whether you really did figure it out or not.
Right, right. And I think like the problem with using some of the internet is the internet's full of a lot of great information. Yeah, I do a lot of Google searching and everything myself. There's a lot of information you can find out, but how do you know if that information really applies to you? How do you know, like, okay, this appears black and white, but there's a gray area, and that's where you're in? One of the things that comes to mind, and this is a question that I get all the time, is should this position be an employee or an independent contractor? And I'm just like, there's a lot of areas where it's like, okay, clearly an employee, or this could totally be a contractor. But where people get in trouble is for the positions that fall into the gray area. And a lot of times it's like, my advice is talk to a lawyer who specializes in this, that can help you figure it out so you stay on the right side of things, because that gray area is messy. And like I feel like there's so many areas of the business that it's like that gray area is the messy area that you don't want to get wrong.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that. I mean, employment is an area that is changing so rapidly, and especially since it's state by state regulations. During the pandemic, it really opened the doors to hiring anywhere. And so we have a lot of clients that have hired employees all over the country without necessarily understanding the implications of that. And so you've got, setting yourself up properly in that state, and then just the dynamics of every state having different rules. And so employee contractor is one, great example. I know you have some shows where this has been talked about a bunch, but there's a number of other areas that are just constantly moving, such as paid leave, pay equity. The non-compete topic is really hot right now. So there's a lot of areas that are just, you got to know what you don't know. And I think that's the really tricky part.
Yeah. Like you just mentioned non-compete. And I know there's a lot of stuff that's like actively changing right now, things that went in place. It's like, oh, maybe not, like all those things. Like, we're going to have to figure that out. But I remember talking to a client years ago, and they had a past employee that reached out to see if they would waive part of the non-compete. And I was telling them, I was like, okay, well, first off, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you exactly like what you have to do. Like part of this is the person's reaching out. You don't want this person on your team. They weren't there for very long. Do you really want to stop them from being able to get a job? So there's some of the things that there's the legal stuff. You could legally be protected, but then there's all the stuff of, but what is your gut telling you to do? Is there a reason for you not to waive it? Is there a reason for you to waive it in this thing? But one of the stuff that I was looking up is there's that whole thing. It's like, I forget exactly what it was, a phrase at that point in time, but saying that a non-compete could be seen as invalid if it was too restrictive on a person being able to find another job. And so like, I felt like that was totally a gray area, because what did that mean? And we had to look at it. It's like the distance that this person had put in place and what that distance actually meant in the area that we live. Because we're like, oh, it didn't seem that far miles wise. But when we actually looked at how long it takes someone to drive that type of miles, and this was a type of business where their clients were making multiple trips a week to the location. So it wasn't like, oh, once a year, I'm willing to drive 2 hours to see this, my new person, so we're going to lose clients. It was just like, I don't know if people are really going to drive all the, like your clients are going to leave you to go see this person. So we're like, would a court view this distance as too far? And it's like, once again, that gray area where it's like, if you're going to say no to waiving it, you might want to talk to a lawyer to make sure that if he decides to fight you legally, could this actually be upheld? Because there's all that gray area of those rules.
Well, and then what precedent are you also setting with other employees around enforcement versus non-enforcement? That's something that we definitely see is, you know, enforcing it against one person for a particular reason, but then it's not enforced against somebody who might be of a protected class, and all of a sudden it looks like you've got some disparity in your enforcement and your protection. But I think you raise a really great point there with your gut, and there's been a lot of rules that have come out recently that are um, they're taking away protections that businesses have historically relied upon. So things like having to disclose pay ranges, removing non-competes, narrowing non-solicitations, removing some provisions from confidentiality language. And our reaction often as business owners is, wait a minute, this isn't fair. I need this stuff, right? I need this in place. And when you look at it objectively, I find that ultimately these are things that are really good for employees. It's really good for the market. It's really good for the economy. And so how do we as business owners think about kind of both the offensive and the defensive positions in protecting ourselves? Because these things that we've relied on are no longer there. So we can't simply say, okay, well, I'm going to yank that out of the contract and now I have this big gaping hole. But instead, what do I put in place? What are the tools that are available to me to protect my actual legitimate business interests, which is the language is often used. But as you mentioned, it's like the default was to make it as broad as possible. And that default is what the laws are trying to combat at this point is,
Yeah.
okay, we need to swing the pendulum the other direction.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's like so true. If you think of some of the things like disclosing salary, like I know some people that were like, wait, I don't want to put the salary on the job post in certain states, certain cities and stuff. We're starting to require it. But I remember having to have a lot of conversations of like, why not? Why are we hiding that? People work for a paycheck. We're putting out there what that you want this employee to do for you. Why aren't you putting out there what you're going to do for this employee? And why should we get all the way through a hiring process to then realize that we can't afford an employee? That they can't afford to take a job with us because it's a massive pay cut. And so, like, once we start looking at that, it's like, what is the benefit of hiding information? Or like some of the stuff that, other stuff you were mentioning, like some of the benefit was to protect us as a business. And it meant sometimes I feel like a more restrictive candidate pool because it's like, oh, well, this person can't work for you because there's that non-compete in place. But really what they did over there at that company, really, there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to work for your company, but there's that non-compete there. Like I remember years ago, there was this lady that we really wanted to hire back when I was in corporate. And the company she was coming from, specifically, even though she was moving from another state, had a non-compete that no one from their company could come to our company because in some ways we really weren't we really weren't, but they saw us as a competitor. And what she'd be doing for us was not similar at all to what she had been doing in her other role. So it wasn't like she could take the secrets from them and bring them over to us. It was like transferable skills. And when she turned in her notice, they came after her when they found out that she was going to be coming to us. And she was like totally blindsided because she was like, I wasn't even in a position where it would make sense for there to be a non-compete, but they had a non-compete for all of their employees. And it meant that she had to start her job search all over again. She was getting ready to move and relocate to another state. She was getting ready to get her kids settled into schools and all these things where it was just kind of like that non-compete made it so she couldn't go out and get a job and we couldn't hire someone who was qualified for our position. So it really limited what we were able to do. And they're really, like I said, it was one of those things you looked at it like this particular situation. You're like, why does that even apply to her and this role?
Yeah, and I think that's where so many of the state regulations are trying to combat that. The idea that it's a blanket provision that everybody gets. And most of the states that have incorporated this have some sort of salary threshold or exempt, non-exempt threshold for when a non-compete is enforceable. Of course, California's got its ban, and then the federal ban, which is proposed at this time, would also basically, remove that. But you raise another point, I think, about the information that employees have and the information that they are now demanding. And so even if you are not required to put the pay equity language in your job posting, so the pay range, the benefits, those sorts of things that are required by some states, um, employees are kind of expecting it now. So they're they might just skip over your job posting because it doesn't have it and another one does. And so that transparency is giving, the companies that are putting it out there a bump potentially in that visibility and that application, because those applicants may just choose not to apply if you don't have it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's totally true. It's totally valid. It's like, as a candidate, there's so many opportunities now, a lot of times, that, why are you going to apply for the job that is hiding important information? Why are you going to apply for the place where it just doesn't look like they're maybe employee friendly, when there's other opportunities to apply for?
100%. And so I think that this kind of goes to, what kind of a place do you want to be? And I feel, as a Gen Xer, I feel I've grown a lot with my millennial and Gen Z colleagues around, what should the workplace look like, right? What policies do we want in place in order to attract and retain people that fit who we are, who fit what we do, and who really are excited about being there. And so, beyond, the compliance piece, you've got the culture piece, and the engagement piece.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to go back for a second, because like you were talking about something that I feel is so important. And I just want to dive a little bit deeper into this. As you mentioned, like, kind of COVID spurred this, more people working remotely, companies realizing that we don't need everybody here in the office. And so a lot of times I know when people are going to hire and they're like, okay, I can hire a remote employee, one of the things I say is like, okay, what does that mean? Remote within your city, remote within your state? Are you willing to cross state lines? Okay, if you're willing to cross state lines, you know that you then have to follow their rules of what it looks like. A lot of times you have to register in those states and all that stuff. You have to be willing to do that stuff, which then sometimes people hear that. And so they're like, okay, someone could work remotely, but they have to be in my city or in my state, so they don't have to deal with all those, knowing the different rules and regulations. One of the questions that I have around that is, how do you handle if an employee moves to another state? And is that something where you can, or do you have to set yourself up protection from the beginning to say, you're an employee for us? Let's say I live in Florida, because you live in Florida. If you decide to move to another state, even though you work remotely for me in Florida, that terminates your job if you move to another state, or has the potential to.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, most states in the US are at will employment, which means that either party can terminate the employment at any time for any reason or no reason at all, as long as it's not discriminatory. So it doesn't necessarily need to be explicit. It can simply be, hey, we're going to try to work together to make this work, but you're moving to California, and I'm not going to incorporate California's labor laws into my Florida, handbook and policies. I can't afford to do what California requires me to do, and therefore we can't keep you from moving to California. There's nothing wrong with that sort of an analysis and that sort of a conversation. I don't think it needs to be explicit. If it's something that is maybe anticipated, so the employee has mentioned that, then I think that discussion should happen sooner rather than later, because then you're just having that, again, transparent conversation about what you feel you're capable of doing. And certainly documenting those kinds of conversations when you have them, so that you've got some history around why the decision was made and how that decision was made as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, I know there's a few people lately that I've been talking to, actually over the past few years since COVID, and they work for bigger organizations. So some of these organizations, they already have employees in a lot of states, but they're like, yeah, my employer said I can work from wherever. My position's 100% remote now. So I just decided to move. And I'm just like, ooh, is that ever part of the conversation of, yes, you don't need to be at an office anymore, but there might be some restrictions on where you can move, or if you're able to continue your job if you move.
Yeah, and I think that happened a lot during COVID and thereafter, was someone just picked up without even telling their employer. They picked up and went to live in the mountains of Idaho because it was beautiful and inexpensive and, made them happy and safe. And so ensuring as an employer that you know where your people are actually is important, for a number of reasons, but compliance with that state law is one of them.
Yeah. It was even well before COVID. So it's back when I was in corporate. I remember there was an employee that was fully remote, and all of a sudden finding out when they submitted their paperwork to HR with their new address for like change of like paperwork stuff, it was like, wait, hold on. We didn't know about this. And even though we were a company that was in multiple states, that was a state we weren't in. So it was just like, we need like the HR team and the legal team needed to then go and do their due diligence. Like, what does it mean to have an employee in the state? And at the end of the day, is it worth it for this position, for this team member? And I think there was even one team member where it was like kind of put on the spot. It's like, we're not continuing employment with you if you live in that state. Like, yes, we said you could work remotely, but that agreement was remotely at the address that you gave us or in that state that you gave us. And, that whole thing of like, we're not going through the process of adding that state and all their regulations to our processes.
And I think that raises a good point about, where in your handbook, where in your policies does it say you must, update us for a change of address or a change of contact information as well. It's typically an annual thing that a lot of companies would do as part of benefits or something. But as far as notifying the company specifically, I don't know that most people have a requirement that's documented for that.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like there are like some things like how many people work in New York City who don't actually live in New York? There's people that come from all sorts of states around there. And so it might, now those companies, it's probably pretty standard if you're a larger company, but not necessarily if you're a smaller company, like where do they live? And then sometimes does it make a difference of if you're a company that's on the border, and even if someone's coming into the office, does it make a difference of where that person's residential address is, even though they're working at your place of employment? So I'm trying to think of, I don't know the difference in the laws of these two states, but like I said, I live in Florida. So what happens if an employee lives in Georgia, but they're working in my physical location? Does that count as someone who hiring an out-of-state employee, even though they're coming to my physical location to work because they live in another state?
Yeah, I think that's also going to be state by state because we have the same thing with, the Portland area and Southern Washington, right? You see a very similar
Yeah.
situation. And then you even see another layer of that would be a city's rules. So when the mandatory paid sick and safe leave went into effect, what Washington State required and what the city of Seattle required were different. And so you had to track the number of hours someone spent working in the city of Seattle versus working outside of the city of Seattle, and calculating their leave rights at different levels. So this is where there is nuance and understanding the dynamics of the region that you're in, and some benefit to staying within that region because at least then you feel really safe and confident that you've got the right information all the time. But there are definitely reasons to have people all over, and just making sure you know what you don't know.
Yeah. And so completely aligns with the fact of why we need to be proactive and have general counsel and everything for our business, because we don't know what we don't know. If you don't have someone that's kind of like raising the flag and be like, wait, have you thought about this? Are you ever going to think about it? Like, we are experts in what we know. We are typically, we might follow the news and updates around things that matter for like the services we provide, where our expertise is, but we're not following everything that, you need to know for a business, because that would be so much information, everything from marketing to the legal, to the HR, to a tax law, to everything. Like, there's so much information that we don't know that we don't know.
That's right. And I think that, we all learn from the very beginning of our businesses to surround ourselves with the right advisors. And oftentimes we have, advisors that are sort of, I would say, ancillary, that we call when we quote need them. And I think that is always a challenge, is if we don't know what we don't know, then we don't know when we need them. And
Right.
part of, I think where fractional service providers have really come in and had so much impact is that you can have that voice available on a more regular, proactive cadence than simply being like, oh, I think I need to talk to the tax guy. Maybe we have a quarterly meeting with the tax guy, right? And the same thing with, HR, marketing. And now, legal is one that I think is definitely a laggard in this space. But the opportunity to have somebody's voice that says, hey, a year from now, you plan to be here. And here are the 4 or 5 things that we need to put in place in order for you to confidently be able to make that decision and go here. And so that's an area that I think there's just so much opportunity.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things, like, once again, like we never think about, like I said, we think about legal as that reactive thing that I would never think about bringing legal into those conversations about just normal expansion. Where do we want to go? What do we want to do now? If there was like, okay, well, I'm thinking about franchising my business. Well, obviously, I know there's a lot of legal things that you need to go through. So you probably need help there. But for basic things, yeah, I wouldn't know when I should be bringing somebody in. So I think to have that kind of that general counsel that is a part of those conversations, to bring in that strategic level view and everything is so valuable.
Yeah, a tool that we have put in place, and it's on our website if anyone's interested in taking a look. It's called a business health assessment. It's about a 7-minute online survey and sends to you a 30-page report that basically says, you said you feel at some level of confidence in your employment documents or in your insurance or in your strategy. Here are some things you should be thinking about. And it's a great tool for, I think, businesses to just have a little bit of that, oh, what's that? I hadn't really thought about that. And it's a great tool to take to other advisors, your banker, your CPA, your financial planner, because it helps with some thinking around things that cross over advisors that often are siloed in our minds as business owners, but really they hit multiple people. And so we found it to be a really fun tool, and we use it as a starting point for our conversations with our clients as well to say, where do you feel super good, and what here surprised you? And those things that surprise people then can up kind of the education and then bring the right people in to support that. So that business health assessment is on our website at equinox.law.
All right. Yeah. And of course, like we'll include a link to that in the show notes. Okay. So a random question that I have, so obviously when you start your business, you have to pick, a legal structure and everything. And I think there's a lot of things we do when we start our business that sometimes we're not that forward thinking. Do legal structures matter when it comes to hiring a team?
I don't know that they matter for hiring a team. And I say that because the entity is a risk mitigation tool, right? So whether it's a corporation or LLC, which are the two most common, structures that people use when they're operating a business, both of those provide the owners with liability protection. And that's really what the entity does. It's a tool that provides the owners with liability protection from bad things that happen in the business. Their personal assets are protected. When you're hiring and bringing people on, the risks and liabilities associated with doing that are sitting in that entity that's protected. So I think from that standpoint, it doesn't really matter. Where it might matter is when you're looking at giving employees some sort of equity, phantom stock, those types of things, because the structures of the ownership and the decision making, the governance piece is different. And so if that's part of your longer term plan, that would be something to consider at the time. But I would also add that many states have now allowed companies to transition from an LLC to a corporation or vice versa. And you can even, in many states, convert your entity from, let's say, a Washington entity to a Delaware entity. And so the choice of where the company is domiciled also matters for tax purposes and privacy purposes and other, if you're planning to go public or planning on VC funding, there are reasons to be in certain states. And so that factor is actually important as well.
Yeah, I remember. So back when I left my corporate job, it was to start a completely different business with my husband. And it was a software business that we were planning on. We had our roadmap mapped out. And so we did our research and talked to people. And I remember we did a corporation through the state of Delaware and everything. And I talked to someone else just randomly in a business class, and they were like, "That was ridiculous. Every business should be an LLC." And I was like, "You haven't even talked to me 2 words about asking me what type of business I have." I was like, maybe we should talk about the business that I have, and then you can tell me if I set it up incorrectly. But that's why I think it's so important to get that specialized help. The person who's just not going to go, like we talked about, going and research on the internet, research on the internet, or someone that's just going to tell you general advice is going to look at maybe that 80-20 rule and say, well, 80% of businesses need this, so this is what I'm going to put out there. But if you fall in that 20%, what's right for you? What is the right decision for you to protect your business, not only today, where you're going to go and all those things where, like you said, like now some states will allow you to transfer and do those things and make changes. But there's a lot of times where that's not an easy process. So it's like, get the support and get the guidance and get the help to do it right the first time versus like having to jump through hoops to make changes later.
Absolutely. And thinking about where you plan to be in the future, because then a lot of times the conversation is, sure, you can convert to Delaware if you get venture capital funding and want to go public, and that's what they demand that you do. You can do that in the future, but from a cost and pragmatic standpoint today, maybe that's not where you start, right? But if you've already got these investors lined up, maybe you start there because that's what they're going to demand anyway. And so I think understanding what those dynamics are and having the information specific to your situation and your plans is important to making the right decision.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I want to go back to this assessment that you have. What are some of the top areas where people realize that, ooh, I don't know what to do here. I need some help. I need some support. Like, what are some of those top things that majority, if we're talking about that 80-20 rule, maybe 80% of the people that fill that out are falling into some of the areas they need some additional guidance or support or knowledge about?
Yeah, I think data privacy is a big one because it is another area that's changing a lot. And we don't have a federal rule the same way that the EU has GDPR. And so it's state by state, and the states are still developing this. And so that translates into what does your privacy policy on your website need to say? Do you need a terms of use for your website? What level of engagement or number of users that are seeing your website do you need to have in order for certain laws to trigger? So that is an area that most people just, they create their website, they pop up some generic privacy policy and move on. And keeping that up to date with the privacy rules and what your business is doing is really important. Another one that's becoming more visible is the website's ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. There's been a lot of lawsuits, especially for consumer-facing websites, that they're getting sued because an individual with a disability is not able to use the website. And that's becoming very, very common due to laws in New York and California specifically, but also elsewhere. Employment's always a big one because it is something that we as business owners tend to be very opportunistic with our kind of hiring. It's like, oh, there's a person, I want to hire them, let's go. And the systems, not only the documents, but the systems around hiring are not necessarily audited on a regular enough basis. And so, employment documents should be looked at least once a year, if not more frequently. And certainly if you're hiring someone in a new jurisdiction, looking at that frequently. We do a quarterly legal update for our clients that says, hey, here's the laws that are coming down the pike. And, inevitably, probably 50% of them are employment related. And so staying on top of that, most folks, they do an okay job, but they're not as proactive as they should be or would like to be. So those are probably the big areas. I think insurance is another one. Having the right amount of insurance and covering the right areas of your business is critical. And I think a lot of businesses have a good relationship with their broker, but every year they're just sort of signing the same thing every year rather than evaluating how the business has changed. So we've seen a big uptick in cyber risk. Well, what does that mean to your business, right? Not just cyber risk generally, but what does that mean to your business? What data do you have, and what is the exposure you have? Employment practices liability is another one that's often missed when you're very small. And as you get bigger, employment practices liability covers you for claims against you as an employer. And so, again, it's a tool set that's available to help you. And so really evaluating insurance and ensuring that on a regular enough basis, you're looking at, okay, what has changed? And do I need to adjust that coverage as to make sure that tool is available when I need it?
Yeah, this is all a great list. And there's some things that you're talking about to me. I'm like, I don't know if I have the right things in place for myself. Like I know for my website, like I have the policies and stuff up there, but it's probably been a long time since I've updated it. So those things where it's like, okay, like the GDPR and stuff like that, I know is always one of those things. It's like, but I don't target people in another country. So, but they're like, I know at one point in time, it's like, well, it doesn't matter if they could end up on your website. And it's just like, well, anyone could end up on your website from anywhere, like, that type of thing, where it's just like, what actually applies to me? And then I think sometimes there's the things in certain states and everything that, if you're below a certain number of employees or you're below a certain revenue or things like that, some things don't apply to you. So it's kind of like you forget about it because you're like, oh, I didn't have to worry about that. But then you forget when it actually does. And it's like, oh, yes, there was that trigger. There was that trigger. And now I have to do this thing. But we forgot about it because we have so much to worry about.
I think that's where having really good advisors that you meet with regularly, right? And you ask the questions because we had a similar question around insurance. And it's like, well, who's supposed to tell us what to change? Like, how do we know that something has changed? And wouldn't it be great if our insurance broker sat down with us and said, okay, here's 20 questions. Has your average transaction changed? Has your average client profile changed? Has you done anything that's way outside of the ordinary? Are you planning to add products and services? And really sort of broadening our mindset, because all we're typically doing is going through the questionnaire and making sure that everything's accurate and hoping that they're going to come back and say, hey, I saw this. Do you need to make an adjustment? And oftentimes that latter part doesn't happen. It just renews at the same rate. And the same with our bankers. Bankers are the same thing.
I think there's some things that hesitation of having those things. So if you're talking to your insurance broker about things that are changing or about things that might be happening this year, like, oh my gosh, my policy is going to increase, but my policy is going to increase. What if I don't need that increase of policy? Because even though it's on my pipeline, it might not actually happen. And if I tell him this, how is that going to change? And, all these things where they're like thinking, what if, because this is going to cost me money. And I think sometimes we let that cost hold us back. And, from a lot of things, because do you have a relationship with a broker or someone that is going to ensure you have the right things versus just trying to get you a bigger policy so that way they make more money? And so I think you really need to make sure you have the right relationships, possibly some things in there for checks and balances and all those things. Like, one of the things I really like about my financial planner for a personal side is I can go to him and ask questions and being like, hey, we don't have an umbrella policy yet. This is my question at one point in time. It's like, should we be having an umbrella policy? Because I hear about them all the time, and him having to break it down and being like, at that point in time, he goes, okay, well, here are your assets. Here's what you have. Here's what's protected. If people come after you, here's what's not protected. No, at this point in time, it doesn't make sense for you to have an umbrella policy. And then years later, he goes, okay, your assets have changed. Now, if we look at your assets and what people could come after if they sue you, it makes sense to have an umbrella policy to protect that. But it's having someone who wasn't just like, buy the policy because, hey, we talked about it, so buy it. It was like, let's actually look at what makes sense for you. What makes sense versus what's going to make me money.
Well, and you have that trusted advisor, right? So your financial planner is the person that you went to say, talk me through this. And you had the right person who was able to do that. And so I think another, element of the advisory relationship is, recognizing maybe when you outgrow a relationship. So whether that's a CPA, whether that's a lawyer, whether that's a insurance broker, right? All of those are folks who their target market is a particular size of business or particular demographic or industry. And so recognizing when your business has outgrown that and needs a higher level of service and being comfortable with spending that extra money likely will be beneficial in the longer term. And sometimes you ask for more, right? With the CPA, hey, I want to meet quarterly and talk about, the tax strategy and the revenue strategy for this business, which is different than, here's my receipts, please fill out my tax return for me, right? And so I think that's a really important piece of, like, as businesses grow, being more strategic across all of the areas and making sure you've got advisors who can help you be strategic.
Right, right. So let's go talk more about, before we wrap up today, just kind of the general counsel and everything, and getting that support within your business. So our listeners range, they're very small businesses. Some are still that business of one that's trying to really learn to hire that very first team member. Some people might have contractors on their team. Some have a small team of employees. I know sometimes the answer should be from the very beginning, when you open the doors on day one, but realistically, we're looking at things. When should be the time that someone's really getting that consistent support from a general counsel, building that relationship? So yes, there's all those things that you might need to do when you start to make sure you're starting correctly, but is it really start correctly and then you should immediately go into an ongoing long-term relationship where you're meeting with them regularly to talk about your goals, to talk about what's going on? Or after someone helps you with that kind of startup things, making sure you have all your ducks in a row, your contracts, all that stuff, is there then a time where it's like, okay to be in we'll talk when we need it, but once you reach this threshold of revenue or this threshold of having employees, you really need to have that consistent person that is a part of kind of like that fractional general counsel that's there on your side?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think from, the startup or the initial conversations, if you can create sort of a 12-month roadmap, if you have that vision for 12 months out, that would give you a sense for what you need, what you should be looking out for. And so I think that's a conversation with your advisors, not just in your head or in your business plan, but a conversation with your advisors on, okay, I plan to be there in 12 months. What should we put on the roadmap? And then you don't necessarily need that regular conversation, but maybe some milestones, right? So I think that's one way to think about it.
Okay.
Another way that I think about it is risk profile. And risk profile to me has two components. One is the risk profile of the industry or the business, right? How big is it? What industry is it in? Is it highly regulated? Is there professional liability as well as business liability, meaning they're a licensed professional of some sort? What is the risk of that business? Because that's going to frame a lot of how much you need to pay attention, right? The second is the risk tolerance of the owner, right? So we have some clients that will sign anything. I'm gonna do this deal no matter what, so I might as well just sign it. And people who won't sign anything until it's been reviewed and negotiated ad nauseum, right? So we have different needs for those folks as far as what kind of information they need. So for the person who'll sign anything, it's still important to know what you're signing, because you may be in breach of that contract on day one because you don't have the privacy, the security, the insurance requirements in place. So they need to know what they're signing so that they can make an evaluation on what needs to ship. And then on the more risk averse side, then it's how do we balance your needs to be to understand all the risks to getting the deal done, right? Like, how do we get there with those people? So when you think about that spectrum of risk and the moving parts around that business, then you start to say, well, how frequently do we need to talk based on how frequently that I as a business owner have needs to talk, and the business has changing elements that need to be addressed. And so I think that frames the complexity of the relationship, the complexity of the business, and can drive some of that. So between the roadmap and just understanding your business and personal needs for that engagement, I think helps to frame it. And building a relationship with someone who knows business. I think that's really important in the legal front, is not, just getting the legal advice, but getting the legal advice in the context of where the business is going, what the business needs. Because as you know, as business owners, a lot of our decision making is not about risk. It's financial, it's emotional, it's relationship oriented. And so if you've got an advisor that's coming at you with just a risk perspective, um, you're going to be possibly less likely to engage them because you're going to sign it anyway, for
Yeah.
example. And so getting that conversation that's more about where are we trying to go, I think is a really critical part of success.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love everything that you shared there. That, it is one of those things like the support you need is going to be different based on your business, where you are, where you're going, and everything. A business, like I know that there's a lot of businesses out there that I work with in my general area is they've kind of reached the level that they really care. It's about sustaining. They're not looking to open a second location. They're not looking to grow their team. They're not looking to significantly grow their revenue. So that type of business probably needs different support than a business that, yeah, you're trying to rapidly grow. You're one employee today, and you hope by this time next year you have 5 employees, that you hope you're tripling your revenue this year compared to next year. And like all those things where it's like you're in that rapid growth. And I like how you said for some businesses that milestone. It's like, okay, you set that thing. It's like, maybe I don't need to be in touch with these people every day. We don't need to have monthly meetings. We don't need to necessarily have quarterly meetings. But when this happens, we need to meet. So we make sure that, okay, we're still in a good place. And all that stuff. And even you mentioned it's like, if you're the type of person that you know this about yourself, you're going to sign anyway, or you're going to make sure every line is reviewed. Having the person that's going to work well with you. If you're the person that's going to sign everything, maybe you also need that person on your team that's going to say, no, let's actually look at this first. Like, you're not allowed to sign anything without me looking at it, because reminding them, remember when you did that on this contract and it got you in trouble? So let's take a step back, let's slow down and everything. Not that you can't sign, you're just not going to sign yet.
Informed decisions.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Changing that line. Like, and it is one of those things. Like, you got to know what you're signing. You got to know what you're in for. You got to know all those things and protect yourself. And, especially if you're signing a contract someone else sent you, that contract was put in place to protect that business. So what protects you when you're signing that contract? So you want to make sure that it protects you just as much as it protects them.
And another very interesting point on that is shorter is not better necessarily, because what is missing from the contract is often as important or more important than what's in there or overwritten in there. So just keep in mind that if something is only one page in 12-point font, what's not there that you've seen in other contracts as well? Because I think
Yeah.
there is some elements of, oh, shorter is better. We've had clients ask for that a lot, where, just make it as quick as quick and easy as possible. Yes, and we want to make sure it does its job. And so
Yeah.
doing its job is important.
Yeah, like I've seen that where people are like, well, I signed a contract. They're like, okay, well, what were the terms about this? Like, oh, that wasn't in there. And what were the payment terms? Oh, the payment terms weren't in there. Okay, like what happens if someone's late on a payment? Oh, wait, that wasn't in there. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that kind of circling back to the beginning. It's in there to protect you. It's in there to say, okay, I'm telling a client that, for the contract, like maybe we're putting out, you're 5 days late with payments. I am charging you a fee. So that way you have the right to do so. Like, yes, you could always talk things over, look things. You have a good relationship with that client. There's a circumstance going on that makes sense where you're like, okay, I can understand, your bookkeeper all of a sudden was out on emergency leave and couldn't send me the check. So have her send the check when she's back into the office. I'll waive the fee, versus like that client that's always late. And you're like, come on, like you need this fee. It's in our contract. You approved it. You signed off on it. So I am charging you that fee.
Yep. Yep. That happens.
Yes. All right, Michelle, we have to start wrapping up for today because I feel like, as always, we're going way longer than I originally planned, but it's so good. So much great information in here for people. So tell everybody how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. I'm really active on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me there. It's Michelle Bomberger, in the Seattle, Washington area. There should be enough information to connect us. There's also a contact form on our website where you can reach me directly via email through that. The website is equinox.law, and I'd be happy to have a conversation as well. Our phone number's there as well.
Yes. And remind everybody about the assessment. that they can get their hands on?
Yeah, so our website has the what's called the business health assessment. It's pretty apparent where it is. There's a button. And again, it takes about 7 minutes for most people to fill it out, and then you'll get the report via email. And I'd be happy to walk through any questions you have on those reports. If you fill it out and you're like, hey, what is this thing? Be happy to take a few minutes and walk through it with you.
Sounds good. All right, Michelle, my last question that I love to ask all my guests. We've all had leaders or managers that have stood out to us. Think of a leader or manager that has stood out to you and share one thing about them.
I've been really fortunate in my corporate career to work for really amazing women, and two stand out. The first one was my very first corporate job, and it was in Big Four consulting. And I had a leader who just really trusted me. And right before I went back to business school, she invited me to participate on a project with her as sort of the sole consultant in that environment. And I think it was really confidence building at that age. I was, 25-ish, and it was just amazing. And then later on, the second person was when I was working at AT&T Wireless, and again, someone who really just inspired so much confidence and encouraged me to start my own business later on in our relationship. So just feel so blessed to have those two women in my life.
Yes, it's like one of those things when I ask this question, it's always those people that built confidence, helped you see, what you were doing great, gave you, that pathway to run, that encouraged you to do things, are the ones that really stand out and make a big impact on people's career. And it just shows that how we treat our employees matter in the long run. People might not be with us forever, but if they're able to look back at the time they're with us and say, that was a great experience, that should be what we're aiming for.
Yeah, 100%. And I know in my 20-year journey as a business owner and employer, there have been a lot of mistakes I've made as a leader and as a manager. And you hope that people walked away knowing that you were operating in good faith and doing your best for what you had at the time. But sometimes you want to go back and just say, I'm so sorry, I didn't do better.
Right. Yeah. We live and we learn and we improve. But all right, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today on the Growing Your Team podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And that wraps up this episode of the Growing Your Team podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss new episodes. And if your favorite podcast app has the ability, leave a review and let us know what you love about the show. As you wait for the next episode, be sure to follow Growing Your Team on Instagram at Growing Your Team, or head on over to growingyourteam.com to access more resources and learn how growing your team can support you as you master the art of hiring.